So, one of the things that I've been trying to do for the last few weeks is encourage everybody to read the chapter that we're gonna be on. We finished 11 last week, so that means we're in chapter 12, so I don't have anything in my hand to throw, but I'm hoping everybody, other than those who are new with us today, have read. And Jenny's shaking her head. It's like, I'm gonna find that trouble.
I haven't read.
In
the
my
past-
defense, I've had
You
band
can't
camp
throw
all week.
anything in Hershey's or Checkers.
I haven't read in the
That's
past
kinda
2 weeks, but I did
I read it
read
twice.
up through halfway through 13 already. So
Okay.
I'm at least know what's going on.
So if you didn't read it recently, you have read it, okay?
Yes.
So this story, this account is kind of couched in a place that I think we need to be really thinking about the context. I don't know, most people, if they hear that some churches in the book of Numbers, it's like, you know, when we started off, Numbers can be a mind-numbing experience. There's a lot of repetition, there's a lot of strange things happening. And some people have a real issue, have trouble trying to study a book like this. Now, my approach to this is not so much a historical approach. I mean, I'm looking at it historically. I believe it's a historical document. But the relevance of Numbers is not about a journey with Israel from Egypt to the Promised Land. The relevance of Numbers is about us in our journey with Jesus. You know, I shared with you last week, who's getting to the Promised Land? Anybody remember?
Joshua Caleb.
2 people.
Well, yeah, but what I shared with you is those who are led by Yeshua, which is Joshua, Jesus, and those who are like Caleb, who are devoted and faithful. Those are the ones that are going to get into the Promised Land. And it's very important to keep that in mind. Now, the book of Numbers, you know, it started off with, you know, the census, the numbering of the army, 600,000 plus fighting men. And we have gone through all this organization, and now we are actually on the move. They broke camp for the first time. What did we make it? One chapter before the wheels start falling off the cart. The very first chapter after they break camp and begin to journey, the people begin to murmur and complain. They were complaining about the manna, and they were demanding that they wanted meat. And you remember God was not very happy about that. And he said, I'm going to give you meat, all right, until it's coming out your nose. So you'll be eating quail for a month. And now then we're going to move into chapter 12. So let's read it and we'll get into it. And I'm reading from the New King James. And I want to point something out here. Notice the emphasis on Miriam, because it's very emphatic in the Hebrew. These are all feminine pronouns that are in the original text. So Miriam is the main culprit here. Aaron gets caught up in it, ends up kind of where he should be. But anyway, it says, then Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Ethiopian woman whom he married. Now some translations will say the Cushite. It's a foreign wife, okay? It says, for he had married an Ethiopian woman. So they said, has the Lord indeed spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us also? And the Lord heard it. Now the man Moses was very humble, more than all men who were on the face of the earth. Suddenly the Lord said to Moses, Aaron, and Miriam, come out, you there, to the tabernacle of meeting. So the three came out. Then the Lord came down in the pillar of cloud and stood in the door of the tabernacle and called Aaron and Miriam, and they both went forward. Then he said, hear my words. If there is a prophet among you, I, the Lord, make myself known to him in a vision. I speak to him in a dream. Not so with my servant Moses. He is faithful in all my house. I speak with him face to face, even plainly, and not in dark sayings. And he sees the form of the Lord. Why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? So the anger of the Lord was aroused against them, and he departed. And when the cloud departed from above the tabernacle, suddenly Miriam became leprous, as white as snow. Then Aaron turned towards Miriam, and there she was, a leper. So Aaron said to Moses, O my Lord, please do not lay this sin on us, in which we have done foolishly, in which we have sinned. Please do not let her be as one dead, whose flesh is half consumed when he comes out of his mother's womb. So Moses cried out to the Lord, saying, Please heal her, O God, I pray. Then the Lord said to Moses, If her father had but spit in her face, would she not be shamed 7 days? Let her be shut out of the camp 7 days, and afterwards she may be received again. So Miriam was shut out of the camp 7 days, and the people did not journey till Miriam was brought in again. And afterward the people moved from Hazeroth and camped in the wilderness of Paran. I titled this message, if you like titles, Quiet Within Me.
Good one.
And you could add a parenthetical addition to that, off track and out of touch. There's so much going on here, as is always in the book of Numbers. And it sometimes is very difficult to peel back the story and look at it as it's being presented to us, and not through any kind of a presupposition, but to hear God speak what's actually happening here. And see, the one thing that I would remind you, because I've seen this, I read a lot of different sources, I listen to a lot of different sources, and it's almost like they isolate this story as if it's independent of the book of Numbers, like it just fell out of the sky somewhere. It's like we're in the middle of a story. And if you look at it through that lens, this story is different. If you keep in mind where we are at in the story and what's going on and where things are going, the story takes a different twist. Because they are supposed to be, Israel at this juncture is supposed to be doing what?
Journeying to promised land.
Progressing to the promised land. And yet, what are we finding is the truth? What's actually happening is everything that's going on is a detour. It's a distraction. And I think this is no different. Now, what should they be focused on? Getting to the promise, right? I mean, I'm going to tell you, we're going to get into that next week, Lord willing, when we get into 13. The promised land was the key component to the covenant with Abraham, was it not? I'm going to give you this land. And they're not seeing the significance of this promise. Not yet. So the context here in 12 is, we just finished last week looking at what you might call a corporate grumbling, right? In chapter 11, where the whole camp, which mainly was those on the outskirts of the camp and those that were part of a mixed multitude, were murmuring about meat, right? We just saw that. Now, that was the rest of the camp. So in the last chapter, they were just complaining. But in this chapter, they're beginning to challenge. And not only are they beginning to challenge, it went from this outer fringes of the camp right up to the family unit of Moses himself. So that's a significant setting for the story. You know, one of the things about this, and I'm sure if you've ever been criticized, and if you haven't, you don't hang around, somebody's going to. It's not hard if somebody's criticizing you off at a distance, right? I mean, a little bit. I've gotten comments on YouTube and what have you from people that were not very kind about something I said or did without really giving much of an explanation. But I can deal with that, you know, because I don't know who that is. I don't know who that person is. I mean, it gives a name or whatever, but I don't know. But think about it, when it moves closer to home, you know, especially like right within your own family, that's a little tougher to handle. Now, Miriam and Aaron, and I'm starting with Miriam, they don't go after Moses head on, do they? It starts off with this kind of a masked complaint, a criticism that Moses has married this woman. Now, I've read, I haven't seen anything conclusive. Some speculated that Moses' first wife was out of the picture and he'd taken a new wife at this juncture. We're not told. I don't get the sense in the story that there's anything new about this, which is kind of shocking. Why now? Why are they complaining about Moses' wife now? Why at this particular point do they have a problem with Moses being married to an Ethiopian or a Cushite, or however you want to describe that? You know, I'm going to tell you this. I think that really what's being said in that is not what you hear on the surface. Because I think that they're saying that Moses has mixed himself with the pagans. I think that's at first blush what you got to take from that. And they're saying Moses and his family are not really pure Israelites anymore. You know, they're blending the bloodline now with some other nationality and what have you that was not a part of our promise. And I think really underlying it all is they're saying that Moses is not wholly devoted to God. If he were, he wouldn't have had this Ethiopian woman as a wife. So on the surface level, it just sounds like they're making this minor or major criticism. But notice how quick it moves. In verse 2, the real root starts coming out. That there's a spiritual jealousy going on here. Now, based on where we've been in the past, what do you think would spark something like this? Remember, this is the last chapter. What happened with the 70 elders? What did they do?
They prophesied.
They prophesied.
They had one that stayed in the camp and prophesied.
Yeah. And what was their prophecy indicative of?
The Spirit of the Lord being with them.
The Spirit of the Lord being with them. Now, what do you know about Miriam?
She's Moses' older sister.
She's the eldest sister
She's
of
the
the whole
oldest,
clan.
yes.
So in essence, she's, even though it was only a male that could be the firstborn, she was the firstborn in her family. Has she heard any comments about the firstborn?
Probably a little jealous, yeah.
Yeah, she's a little bit jealous. It's like, well, I was born a woman, and yet you got to be a man to be the firstborn. But she is the firstborn. She's the eldest child in this family. And you know what else Miriam is? You know, if you read in Exodus 15 and verse 20, Miriam is the first recorded prophet in Israel. Did you know that? The very first one, right after the Exodus, the Red Sea crossing, Miriam led the women of Israel in a song of praise to God, that God has thrown his rider and the horses into the sea. Miriam did that, and Moses indicates that. That's the first recorded prophecy, and it came from Miriam. Okay? So could you begin to see how she's looking at this situation? Well, here's the firstborn over here, but it doesn't include Miriam. Now we've got the elders who are prophesying, but guess what? It doesn't include Miriam.
Her
Maybe-
name means bitter.
What's that?
Her name means bitter.
Yeah, it does.
So it
And-
makes a lot of sense about her
Yeah.
personality.
You know, but if you go back to Moses' birth, you remember the babies were being thrown into the river? And they came up with the concept to put him in an ark and just pray that God would preserve his life, which he does. They put him in the Nile, and you know who it was that followed the ark?
Miriam.
It was Miriam. You know who it was that put the Egyptian in contact with Moses' mother?
Miriam.
It was Miriam. Miriam there all along,
But now she's not getting.
but now she's not.
She's just kind of pushed to the side.
She's feeling a little bit left out. So she turns this and she makes this horrible statement in verse 2. Has the Lord spoken only through Moses? Well, you know what the expected answer is. Somebody asking a question like that is, she's expecting people to say, oh no, Miriam, God's speaking through you too, right? So you begin to see how this is kind of complicated in a sense. So one of the questions that I have right here, we're not told in the story. What do you suppose it was that Miriam, what revelation did Miriam currently possess that she needed to share with the rest of Israel? Probably nothing.
That's what I would say.
I was thinking that's why
Otherwise, she
she
should have
was
been able to share
a
it,
little
I'm sure.
upset,
Yes.
because
Somehow.
it says, hasn't he also spoken through us? That would indicate it happened in the past.
Yeah.
It wasn't happening now.
Well, think about it, because what she did in the past was perfect.
According to God's will.
That moment of the crossing, to lead all of the women of Israel in a song of praise to God, that was absolutely stunningly perfect. But she absolutely has nothing to add to the conversation at the current moment. Nothing. The purpose of Revelation, where we're at right now in the book of Numbers, was threefold. The revelation that God was giving to Moses, number one, was to establish organization. You remember how the armies were numbered? They were put into their various camps by the tribes. Remember how when we get into the Levites, who were given the different tasks and what have you, and the divisions of labor and what have you. It was all about the organization of the camp of Israel so that they could accomplish the objective of making it to the promised land efficiently. But the second purpose for the revelation was not just organize, but it was to edify. It was to instruct Israel. All of the teaching early on about the holiness and approaching God and not coming near to God in an unclean fashion. You remember how the quarantine system was established, where if you had certain conditions, you had to remove yourself outside the camp. Remember? So they're being instructed on God's holiness, and they're being equipped. So it's organization, edification, and equipping is the purpose for the revelation that Moses is receiving from God. And I seriously doubt that Miriam had anything that was going to be directed towards any of that. And if it were the case, I'm sure that God would have shared it with Moses. And I think this is the real problem in the book of Numbers, is what Miriam and Aaron were doing. It had no direction to it. In fact, what it became was a major distraction, keeping Israel from the journey that they were on. It was a detour. Notice what it says there in the text. It simply implies the Lord heard it. I want to tell you something. I would to God that every Christian or anyone who names the name of Jesus would mark that down, you know, put it in a reverse tattoo on your forehead where every time you look in the mirror you're reminded of that. Can you imagine? I mean, Paul uses this concept in 1 Corinthians to encourage people to understand you're joined to the Lord. You realize that, right? Everything you do, you are taking Jesus with you. Everything. But not only that, everything you do, God is right there watching you. He sees you and He hears you. And yet, do you not think that people are self-deluded in thinking, well, I mean, I'm off over here. Nobody sees what's going on, right? I mean, do we ever fall in that trap? Would it be different if we were reminded regularly that, oh yeah, maybe I get away with that. Maybe my mom doesn't find out, or my wife doesn't find out, or my boss doesn't find out. But guess what? God's going to find out. You know, I thought it was interesting. I went to Matthew chapter 6 when I was looking at this. And 3 times in Matthew 6, Jesus uses this concept. First, when he's talking about giving, he says, you don't give to be seen. You do that in secret. Don't let the right hand know what the left hand's doing. You know, he says, and your Father, who, guess what, sees in secret, will reward you openly. And then he takes it to prayer. He said, don't be like these guys who want to go out on a street corner. Find a closet, somewhere in secret. I love the way that word is used, in secret. There is no such place as secret. Not with the Lord. There is no secret place. There's nowhere you can go. The scriptures say, if I go to the depths, if I go to the heavens, wherever you go, guess what? God is there. He was there before you got there. He finishes that section, you know, it's in verses 4 and 6 and 18 in Matthew chapter 6, talking about fasting. 3 times. And I thought of that here because that's a stunning statement, a shocking statement that God heard them. He's on it. He didn't like it either, right? So verse 3, what do you make of this? That Moses is the most humble man in all of the world. Does that sound like something a humble man would write?
Nope.
Not really. So what are we to do with it? You know, critics just have a heyday with this verse right here.
So it's that he didn't write this book.
Maybe. So let me ask a question, just for conversation here. What's to say, how did Moses write the book, number 1? Are these the words of Moses?
Supposed to be the words of God.
They're the words of God. So what's to say that God didn't inspire Moses to write that down? Now, we weren't there, and I don't know, and it's not recorded. But who knows? Maybe Moses say, Lord, I don't want to write that down. That doesn't sound very humble. So do you think that God is going to, you know, can you have a conversation like that with God? I think at some point God said, did I give it to you? Then write it down. I don't know for sure, but I want to tell you this. Do you know that the definition here, this word, this Hebrew word right here, this may not be the best translation. You can look this up on Bible Hub. It's an easy tool to use. Look it up in the Hebrew. Look up Numbers 12, verse 3 in Hebrew. It will give a Strong's number in the column. You can click on that, and it'll give you all of the definitions, uses, and places that it's found in Scripture and how it's translated. Do you know the primary definition for this word is not meek? The primary definition is one who is miserable. Miserable. Yes. Now, ask yourself, where have we been the last 2 chapters? What did Moses say last chapter, guys?
Kill
Come
me.
on. Lord, just kill me right here and now. Does that not sound like a miserable guy? Okay?
Pretty humble.
Have we forgotten this already? You see what I'm saying? Now, I believe that the meekness comes in, the humbleness comes in. It has to. It comes out in the story. But I think it's a combination of both. That Moses is a most miserable guy. He's been given a very difficult task with a very difficult people. But I think he's also very humble. Because you know what meekness means? Remember we went through this in the fruit of the Spirit. I know that's been a few days ago. What is meekness? What is humility? Is it weakness?
No.
Strength under control, right? Yeah. Wouldn't you say that Moses was pretty meek or humble? So, you know, when Moses receives these accusations, what does he do?
What's the God?
He didn't do anything.
You just
No,
sit
he's
there.
summoned before God. He didn't respond in any way, shape, or form.
You didn't say anything.
He didn't say anything.
Yeah, 'cause God just talked to
And
all of
actually,
them,
he,
and then poof, she's got leprosy,
and then he's begging
oh yeah, he did, he asked for God to heal her,
Yeah.
because
he asked for
they asked
forgiveness.
Moses.
Well,
Then
first-
God basically was like, no, I basically spit in your face, and what happens then, you know, get out.
So they're
Enjoy your
summoned
week.
to the tabernacle, all three of them. God says, get over here right now. Comes down in the cloud, pillar of cloud, comes down and meets with them right there. And he tells Miriam and Aaron about his relationship with Moses in verses 6 to 8. And God is making a very radical contrast between his communication with Moses
Everybody else.
and everybody else. Nobody like this before. Moses receives his revelation face to face. And something that I cannot fully grasp is that it says that he grasped God's form. Because the scripture says nobody can look on God and see and live, right? You know, we have the story where Moses is in the cleft of the rock and God passes by and he uncovers, you know, where he can see his back. But here he said that they're talking face to face and that Moses can comprehend his form. I have a theory about that. I don't know that I can prove it, but the only thing that I've ever come to, and I've shared this with you guys many times before, and we looked at it in 1 Corinthians chapter 10. Who is the rock that's following Israel in the wilderness? It's Jesus. And we've talked about the angel of the Lord before, right? Angel of the Lord receives worship, you know that? So the angel of the Lord can only be deity. That's not a regular angelic being. And I believe what's happening here is there's two different deals going on. And I think every epiphany of God in the Old Testament was Jesus. I believe that Jesus has always been the expression of God on earth.
That's what he's.
I think that's exactly who he's talking to. Remember I shared with you last week about the Mount of Transfiguration, where it's reversed. Elijah and Moses meet with Jesus on that mountain to talk about his exodus. And I think it was exactly, it seemed like old times. Moses was like, this is just like it was back in the wilderness at the tabernacle. So that's just a theory of mine. I don't know that you'll find universal acceptance of that, but I think it explains pretty well what's going on. But look at the accusation God brings. Why were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? Isn't that kind of a staggering? You know, and I want to be very general here, and I'm not, you know, so anything sounds incriminating, I don't have anybody specific in mind. But I tell you what, being in ministry as long as I have, it's always amazed me at how bold some people can be to think that they can just say, you've seen this, right, firsthand, yeah. It's kind of scary sometimes, that people think, yeah, they're gonna let you know something, and it's like, but God says, you know, how come you weren't afraid to do that? You know, and I sure wouldn't wanna push people to go the other way, you know, I mean,
To just accept whatever.
well, yeah, and I'm actually thinking of like a Catholic hierarchy and what have you, you know, or like the Pope where you kiss his ring or whatever. I mean, I certainly don't think that anybody in ministry should have a pedestal to where, you know, they're above accusation. But I sure don't think that there ought to be a punching bag where anybody can just throw anything they want, anytime they want.
Well, in this case, I think the problem was, and this is just my opinion, that they spoke behind his back instead of going to him and saying, this is something that we want to talk to you about, or whatever. They were like, gossiping behind his back.
Yeah.
I think it had to be Miriam who started it anyway, had it.
She was.
did. Well, you know, because Aaron wasn't.
We're talking about Moses' wife, so it's like, why would Moses really honestly care? It's not his wife.
And the same thing with
Miriam,
Aaron,
though, it's like she's being all petty over there.
Yeah.
Why is he marrying beneath you? What happened?
You know what's kind of funny is you have two siblings coming against their other sibling, right? And it's kind of like, I'm gonna go tell dad on you. You know, if you think about it,
Yeah.
that's basically, she was mad and she wanted to tell on Moses. And I think that's kind of an interesting dynamic too, because they actually get to see God
Yeah.
and still voice their complaint. And he heard it. Did he agree with it? No.
I didn't agree with it.
No. And did she get a consequence? Certainly did.
Yes.
There was no gentle parenting.
It didn't really say that after. I mean, it implies that, hey, she's going to be put out for 7 days. After that, you know, you'll be healed from leprosy, come back in, we'll go about our way again.
Well, but she still had to do all the things to cleanse herself. The standard cleansing or something like that.
Just the shame of being put out.
Yes.
So before we move too much further here, I wanted to make a point about the position in ministry. Because over the years, and in different places, I've seen this in different levels, that ministry is not just giving a message. You know that, right? That's a very small part of ministry. And yet, in most places, that's really all that's happening in what they define as ministry. But, you know, and I'm thinking again about you got a lot of history. I could give you very specific illustrations that some of you saw firsthand in different places, but it was always amazing to me that you would have a group, or you would have an individual that could prepare a message and preach it, and they looked at themselves, you know, I call it an armchair preacher, you know, like, well, I could pastor this congregation. It's like, yeah, maybe for one Sunday you could. It's like, you sure couldn't stand up here for any extended period of time. You couldn't keep, because you're gonna, number one, you've got like 3 messages in your repertoire there, and that's all you've ever had and probably ever will have. But there is a distinct difference, and it's important for me to establish this right now. We haven't studied Ephesians, but in Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 11, Paul has just been talking about Jesus ascending and distributing gifts. And in verse 11, he said, God gave some, he's talking about the church, he said, God gave some to be apostles, prophets, evangelists, and teaching pastors. And they have a specific job to do within the body of Christ. They are to equip the saints for works of ministry. That's what they're supposed to be doing. The work of the church is not entertainment. It's not half of the stuff that we make it out to be. We have, like Israel, we have a very specific and defined objective that we should be engaging in, expanding in, and yet many times it's not even being addressed at all. We just become a meeting and that's it. But that's not why we're here. We are supposed to have an impact on everything around us. People should be seeing our good works and glorifying God. And it's very important. You know, I was specifically thinking about from this perspective. Those of you who've known me longer, I have always had an objective in ministry. I've always had a direction in ministry that I believe God has given me. And I've always tried to cast that vision to the congregation that I work with. We are not just coming and we've got our little spiritual club going now. And, you know, if you're this kind of person, you can be part of the club. Or, you know, it's not that. It's God bringing about His eternal purpose through a very diverse group of people. And I've seen it before, and I want to say this. I like to say inflammatory things occasionally, so if I enrage or upset you, we can have conversation. But I've always found it interesting. You know who most often meddles in trying to set a direction for a congregation? Bingo.
Oh, I whispered it.
See, and I'm glad that you said it. I didn't say it. She said it.
That's true.
She said it.
Women, because I think they can manipulate their husbands.
And to do what they
Oh,
want,
yes.
or they,
Oh my goodness. And it's like, it gets to be like, well, they have a personal preference about something, and they're not even thinking about the entirety of the group or what needs to happen. But anyway, it's something that we have. This is a more prominent problem than you would realize.
Even now.
Even now? Yeah. Because God, who's leading Israel? Moses?
God.
There we go. God is leading Israel. Remember the cloud, pillar of fire? God is the leader. You remember there's supposed to be these trumpets that are announcing the redemption that are nowhere to be found once they're crafted. We're not hearing anything about them. And the Ark of the Covenant leading out. You know, and we look back and think, well, Moses is the leader. It's like, yeah, I don't think so. Well, I tell you what, I had a few more things I wanted to hit on, and I don't think it's enough to come back to next week. But look at verse 13. Well, actually look at verse 11 and 12, because I think it's important that Aaron realizes, and more importantly, repents from when he sees Miriam in the condition she's in. I think it's interesting that it's Aaron who has the response and not Miriam. And Aaron is definitely affected by it. And I think, remember what I've told you before? While Aaron is the high priest, Moses is really acting as the high priest. He's the one interceding for people, which is what Aaron should have been doing. But Aaron turns to Moses and says, oh, don't let this happen. But look at how Moses, how his heart is. Please heal her, oh God, I pray. You know, what an amazing thing. After being attacked like that, and to be able to turn, you know, I mean, I guess if you saw somebody with leprosy, you'd have to be pretty cold to say, oh yeah, you got what you deserved there. Because that is a death sentence. But she did end up having to stay outside the camp, and I love the way that reads, even if her father spit in her face. So what, before we end here, because this really is pointing to something bigger than what we're looking at here, right? This is really pointing to what Jesus is doing. Moses is a type of Jesus, you know that, right? That's why he's so important in the Old Testament. He is the, I hate to use the word prototype because Jesus is a monogenes. He's the only one. He's totally unique. But Moses is a model. He's a living picture for us to look at. And as faithful as Moses was, remember a few weeks ago I was talking about Hebrews and how the Hebrews writer does that comparison. As faithful as Moses was in all the house, it's God's house, and Jesus was more faithful. And the way that Moses prayed for this healing is the way that Jesus intercedes for us. I mean, all of this is pointing to Jesus. And really, in some way, shape, or form, remember the book of Numbers, we should always be seeing ourselves in the story. So are we acting like Moses? Are we acting like Aaron? Are we acting like Miriam? We need to be asking ourselves that question. And what does God want from us and where we're at in the journey? Because ultimately, Miriam's actions, while the camp waited on her, they had to park for 7 days because she pulled that stone. And they were within striking distance. We hadn't got to 13 yet, where everything really comes off the rail. But they should have been able to make it to the promise. They would have been in the promised land if they would have just put God first and listened to God and lived according to what God was saying. They would have been in the land by the time Miriam came out of quarantine. But they don't. As we well know, 40 years. Round and round in a circle, just watching people die. Well, anybody have a thought, question, comment?
I thought it was interesting, we kind of got Moses leading people in the right direction, Miriam trying to lead people in the wrong direction, and then the follower, Aaron, who really should have been leading people because he was the high priest. There's always a follower, and you're going to follow, that follower is going to follow either the right direction or the wrong direction.
Yeah, and Aaron is not exactly a indication of a good follower, because remember what happened when Moses was on the mountain back in Exodus? All of a sudden this golden calf just popped out of the fire. It's like, yeah, who made that
Can't
happen?
be left alone.
No, he cannot be left alone.
You can't go into
He is, I'm surprised, he's the high priest, but.
Yeah. What's he doing?
It's not.
Well,
doing priestly
the
things.
truth of the matter is there's really not, well, let me rephrase that. The way that Israel started, it's like I told you the other day, this is a hard one to swallow, but Moses didn't live under the law. Moses lived by faith. The rest of Israel was trying to live by law, but you cannot live by law. It will only lead to death. And I believe that's why Moses couldn't enter, even though he struck the rock instead of speaking. God says, I can't let you bring them in. Jesus, that's why Moses changes Joshua's name. We'll see in the next chapter. He changes his name from salvation to God saves. And it's, believe it or not, it's the same word as Jesus in Hebrew, Yeshua. His name is Joshua. And I think that it's more than just a matter of semantics and what have you. God is saying, only Jesus is going to get you there. He's the only one that can lead you. Nobody else. Can't be Moses, can't be the law for sure. If we didn't get that in Galatians, God help us. We need to go back and relook at that again. We have to live by the Spirit, by faith.
I thought it was interesting also how verse 3 and verse 13 kind of go together, talking about how Moses is humble, but also that he begged for his sister to be healed. That is humility, especially after being attacked, like he said.
That's what real leadership should look like right
It
there.
leads.
That's the way Jesus leads. That's exactly the way Jesus does. Yeah, he was reviled and attacked, crucified, and he spoke not in his own defense. He was spit upon and still prayed for their forgiveness. And again, that's us. We're in that audience, guys. We might as well have been at the foot of the cross saying crucify. Our actions are what put him there. Well, shall we head in here for I sometimes have a hard time finding a stopping point.